And welcome to the Sports Roundup at NorthcentralPa.com. My name is Jeff Everett for North Central PA Media. With me tonight, I'm very excited, an old friend of mine, Jake Adams. He is a sports editor for the Sentinel in Carlisle, PA, and he is also a Phillies fan. We won't hold that against him. But Jake, thanks for coming on. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, the Phillies aren't doing me too many favors of late, so I can't be too happy right now.
Yeah, well, thankfully, we're going to avoid the Phillies tonight. What we're going to talk about tonight is what the state is going to do with high school athletics. Everyone's curious about what the PIAA will say on Friday, and we thought it'd be worthwhile to sit down, bring somebody in from another community, somebody who's from further down in the state, who's getting a different experience maybe than we are, and just talk about what the fall would mean if it was a green light, what it would mean if it was delayed, and really just kind of bring that Twitter conversation over to North Central PA and over to Cumberlink.com. So before we get started, just to kind of put everything into context, today, playfootball.com released a nationwide map of the 2020 season plans, basically saying which ones had already moved football to the spring in red, various start times in blue, and then in the green, basically ones that have been greenlit, like schools are hoping happens here in Pennsylvania. You'll see the only state in white is Pennsylvania awaiting a decision. So Friday kind of gives us an idea of where we're going to end up. Are we going to see football in the fall? Are we going to see football in the spring? And Jake, just out of curiosity, what are you hearing down your way?
I mean, Lombardi keeps saying it over and over and over again. They're going to carry on with the fall season, and I can't imagine that that's going to change in the next couple hours here. The latest talk has been about some of the liability issues and whatnot, and we've seen even before this. What was it? Norristown, I think, decided not to. I think they were the first pebble to fall in that one with deciding not to have any fall sports. We saw an entire league down in Philly decide to do the same thing. District 3 and Mid-Penn are kind of almost uniformly working together to delay the season. But, District 3 is going to provide some flexibility in scheduling. They've shortened what the postseason is going to look like. For example, we usually have about an 8-team playoff for the 6A football field. This year it's going to be 4. Basically every playoff field in districts here is going to be cut in half if we have playoffs. And most of the leagues that make up District 3 have delayed the season to some point. Mid-Penn, which is where Cumberland County has all of its teams, they were the first, and being the largest league in the district, kind of made some waves here. They delayed everything to first preseason practices allowed are September 4th, which means we won't have a football season and soccer and field hockey and everything else until September 25th, a first regular season game. So far, there's been 2 District 3 schools that have shut down sports, Reading being one of them, which was obviously a huge thing with how big of a school they are and everything else. But in this neck of the woods, we're not hearing too many confirmed rumblings right now that any individual school is going to go that same route. But I would imagine, I wouldn't be shocked to see if a couple of Mid-Penn schools decide to drop out at some point, maybe some in our neck of the woods. Wouldn't be surprised if some others in District 3 go the same route as well. But PIAA, they're gonna say, everyone have at it. If you want to play, you can play. If you don't want to play, we won't hold it against you. And I'm very curious to see how that kind of shakes out.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by what may happen to the lower part of the state, only because I think we're more set to go as far as, a little more rural area. We have not had any schools come out and say that their sports are canceled. So I am fascinated what will happen if they come out and basically red light it and say that this is going to be delayed, no sports until January 1st. I'm curious if people up north, up our way, are going to be a little more why than people downstate. There isn't a ton of support here to delay. What's the support like down there to delay?
I'd say there's a very, and the pulse that I can say that I listen to or I see the most is on social media, mainly because I've been responsibly quarantining in my house for the most part. I have a girlfriend who is at risk for COVID, so we've been trying to do what we can to stay pretty safe. So I'm not out and about as much as I would be. I'm not, in the community, so to speak, as much as I normally would at this time of year. So what I see for the most part is what I get from talking to coaches, athletic directors, some of our reporters, other reporters from around the area, and watching social media. And what you see on social media is a very, very loud segment that is absolutely against a delay of any kind, to the point of almost believing this isn't an issue. Some thinking this is a hoax. Some thinking, that this is just a whole bunch of political BS. And there are some that are very clearly, we should delay this. We should suspend things to the spring. Sorry, kids. This is life or death for some people. Sports is not worth what we are currently going through and the risks that this could potentially be. I would have to guess, if I had taken an informal poll, probably 2/3 of people really don't believe in delaying the season, or only delaying it just a little bit, like we're seeing in Mid-Penn with a 3-week delay. I would think about 1/3 of people are more on the side of push it to spring, or sports don't matter at all right now. And that sounds callous for those people. And if I'm being completely honest, my opinion is that we should be showing more caution than we currently are. The reality is that there's people here that are affected. I know that there's family members that, they couldn't go to a game because they're at risk. I know that we risk, kids getting this disease, and they might be fine, but bringing it back to a parent that may not. And there are people that recognize some of that stuff. There are people seeing myocarditis stuff. I'm starting to bring that up, something that Big Ten talked about a lot, and as part of its decision to, suspend the fall season. But I'd have to say, in this area at least, it's probably 2/3 on the side of like short delay to no delay at all. And they're very, very loud. And I think that it's kind of kept some people from chiming in and saying, hey, this may not be a smart idea right now. But that would be my guess. And I base that off of no scientific study, no polling whatsoever, but it's just kind of what I seem to get a feel for.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's made this fascinating is awaiting a decision and not having an answer. It really leaves the door open for speculation. It leaves the door open for conversation, kind of what should they do? What will it look like? What will happen? One of the articles that was posted today, and I found really fascinating, Mitch Rupert, actually, for the Williamsport Sun-Gazette, actually did an interview with a lawyer. And the whole conversation was about insurance, about liability. And it really opened up another can of worms that I personally hadn't really thought about. I personally just figured kids would sign a waiver, parents would sign off on it, life would be good, high school sports would continue, not a big ordeal. But Mitch did a really nice job in the article, basically explaining how that's not going to be the case. The lawyer that he spoke to guaranteed that you're going to have lawsuits, and you're going to have people that just file negligence the moment something goes wrong, the moment that a school in particular doesn't follow a guideline. And I was fascinated by that, because I think there's so many things that could prohibit this from happening, things that just the average person walking around isn't thinking of. And this is an example of one of them. I don't know if you've thought of some other ones or things, but I mean, I've thought of like 6 or 7 things in the meantime that I just got my wheels turning. Do you have any that are in the forefront of your mind?
It's kind of along what Mitch's story is about. And I had heard something about this a little bit ago. Those waiver forms that we heard about Ohio State signing, or maybe some high school signing, they're worth toilet paper. I mean, they don't matter for anything other than to try and make some people feel a little bit more comfortable. Like Mitch, talks about in his story there, all it takes is a coach knowingly, defying the guidelines and saying, okay, this kid that we know is presenting symptoms and or has said, I tested positive. They send them out onto the practice field or out onto the field of play, and then someone else on the team catches it and maybe gets seriously ill, or a player on another team or coach on another team gets seriously ill or worse, or a parent or grandparent, any of those combinations. And it doesn't matter what liability form is signed. that school is screwed. If someone wants to take a lawsuit to it, which at that point I almost wouldn't blame a parent or family or whoever going that route, because the warning signs have been here that this is a serious risk. This is, yes, we know the numbers here that, a very small portion of the population are going to come through this pretty well. They're going to have mild symptoms. Maybe it's just a really bad, kind of episode of the flu where you're just in bed sweating and nauseous and vomiting and not eating a whole lot for a couple of days. One, that's not fun. I don't want to have to go through that if I don't want to. I mean, get your flu shots every winter, guys. That's pretty simple. But the other thing to it is this is also more deadly than the flu. This is the worst, pandemic we've had since 1918. And in 1918, granted, that one was worse. That killed 50 million people around the world. We may not see that number with this, but you're seeing a contagious level that is higher than the average flu. You're seeing a fatality level that, especially among the elderly, is higher than the average flu. And we don't have any way to treat it, really. We don't have a vaccine yet. So it just takes the wrong kid getting it and passing it on to the wrong people. And one of them, you roll the die a number of times and you're going to come up snake eyes at some point. It doesn't matter, how long you wait. It's going to happen eventually. And we're going to see, and it's my biggest fear is we're going to see, a kid come down with this that was diabetic, that, he's hospitalized or she's hospitalized or dies from it, or a grandparent that lives at home with these kids, gets this and dies from it, or a coach who is in his 50s or 60s gets this and it, it's hospitalized or dies from it or something like that. These are the worst case scenarios that these liability things are going to go after. And it, with what, 300,000, 200,000 student athletes in the state, I mean, with a 1%, give or take, percentage of people getting this, and that, it's still kind of unclear what the teenage age range kind of gets us at. That's still 100, 200, 300 kids that could get this at any one time and pass this on to a whole bunch of other people. It's a really high risk. And I think, some of the other liability stuff here is, and that's what Mitch's story goes after is, or not, I shouldn't say goes after, but it's brought up by that lawyer that it takes negligence, it takes an intent to make these, liability waivers void. And I've pressed PIAA on this at a meeting. I've asked, aren't there fears about kids lying about this or not saying anything? Because you and I both played high school sports. We played sports most of our lives. We've been around sports our entire lives. There's a warrior mentality culture to this. And it's a good thing at times, but it can also be incredibly toxic. Kid that's got a seriously sprained knee is going to try and get out there for, the 10th game of the football season because the playoffs are on the line. Kid that's got, a concussion is always fighting to try and get out there, even if we've gotten better with diagnosing that and treating it and keeping kids, safe. Twisted ankles, broken fingers, all that stuff. We teach our kids and we teach ourselves through, just internalizing and peer pressure and coaches and everything else that, you fight through the flu. I mean, look at Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan, one of his most famous games is the flu game. Like, we idolize that as a society, and we compare anyone who plays sick to how well they did in comparison to Michael Jordan that night. And then you have an entire segment of the population who basically thinks this is just a glorified flu. So what do you think is going to happen there? It's going to be people trying to be the hero, and you're going to have a kid wake up one morning that's, he or she knows has these symptoms, and a couple of things could happen. One, he could say absolutely nothing and just go to school that day and go to the game and play. And then a couple of days later, the illness gets a little worse and he has to go get tested and finally finds out. Or he could, find out, wake up and not feel that great. And, mom or dad could say, let's not say anything. Or, teammates could be texting them saying, man, like, just get us through one more week. We're going to make playoffs, and, hopefully none of us get it, and you can quarantine after that and we'll be good. Or, a coach might say it or something like that. I trust that most coaches are going to handle this well, but most isn't all, and most parents isn't all, and most kids isn't all. 16, 17-year-old me, I don't think would be like looking at this with the logic of, I can't risk my teammates, my coaches, my parents, the opponents with this illness. If I have this, I can't do that. Then I need to sit out. No, they're going to think, especially if it's, star quarterback Johnny Jr. here, he's going to think, I got to be out there because without me, we're not going to win this ball game and we're not going to make it to districts. Like, I would probably be thinking that way at that age. And I don't blame these kids for thinking that way. But that's what we're opening ourselves up to. And PIAA Lombardi said in the middle of this meeting, you're saying that kids are going to be deceitful, and I just don't see kids being deceitful. And he compared it to, wrestling with skin illnesses that, kids can't hide that. Well, one, that's a physically present illness. Like most of those things are easy to detect. Even if they try and hide it, someone can see it probably. But with an illness, it's not quite the same presentation. No one could know that I have a fever if no one comes near me. No one could know that I'm feeling nauseous if I don't tell anyone. So this warrior mentality is going to translate to illness because, again, flu game. And I think that you're going to see this happen, that you're going to have certain people, either pressure kids or the kids are going to pressure themselves or whatever the combination may be. And again, I'm not saying that everyone's evil and they're all going to do this. I think most are good, but it takes one. It just takes one. And that's what we're going to see happen at some point. I wouldn't be surprised if it's happening right now, to be perfectly honest with you, that some of these teams are having potential cases and not saying anything during off-season workouts or trying to, do whatever to kind of, push it under the rug. And that's just going to endanger everything. And the PIAA set up nothing whatsoever to penalize schools. Schools haven't really done anything to penalize themselves. There's really it's all good faith efforts, and it's up to the coaches and ADs to be the ones that are strict about this stuff. And then the parents and players to be vigilant with themselves. And that's a recipe for disaster. I mean, freedom to have this kind of freedom isn't the kind of thing that, society, and we've proven this with ourselves the last 6 months. If we allow ourselves this kind of freedom to figure it out for ourselves, we have a pandemic that kills more than 160,000 people in one country, one of the richest in the world. We have a pandemic that is dragging on for month 7, month 8 here. And, we don't have stimulus plans to help bail people out more that expired a couple of weeks ago. I mean, without those kind of structures to let, from the PIAA or from school districts or districts and whatnot to, incentivize and decentivize, those kind of actions, we're walking into a trap here that I don't think we're ready for.
No, it's a fascinating way to look at it, because I think most of the discussions that I have seen and that I have had, very few of them are from the viewpoint of the student athlete. And I think the valid point that, the most valid point you bring up there is a student athlete going to protect his abilities to play, or is he going to protect the health of a coach that, in his mind, this may be a hoax. In his mind, this may not be that serious because I'm young and healthy. My coach looks like a young and healthy guy. I think it is fascinating that you're putting that decision in the hands of a 15, 16, 17, 18-year-old kid. And that's the part I'm curious to see how that's handled if this is greenlit. The other interesting one that was brought up and again, I hadn't really thought of until today, Bob Greenberg brought up a great point about referees, which I personally, again, hadn't thought of. One reliable source has told him that at least 9 officials have opted out of reffing games in District 10. There's already a reffing shortage up here in North Central Pennsylvania. I know that it's slowly coming across the state. We're making adjustments to play Thursday and Friday night games just so they had enough referees. And this was before the fear of a referee possibly getting sick. This is another one that refereeing's difficult. You could not pay me enough to do it. You certainly couldn't pay me enough to do it during a pandemic. I'm curious if this is something that's definitely gone overlooked. Are we even going to have enough referees that are willing to do this to be able to play a full slate of conference games?
This has been brought up a handful of times at PIAA meetings that I remember, and this summer, and kind of the sentiment's just been, we think we're going to be okay. We've had a few situations around District 3, I believe, that some games have been postponed or canceled or whatnot because of referee shortages. I think this may not have been District 3. I think I remember one a year or two ago where 2 teams showed up and no refs showed up, and they didn't realize that no refs were scheduled and had to postpone the game. This I haven't done enough to talk to, and it's something that's on our plate here to find out what the referee situation down in District 3 is, or at least the Mid-Penn area. But I think yeah, we're gonna run into it more. I think it's funny. This pandemic is kind of accelerating a lot of things that are happening in the sports world. And this is like a weird plug because I'm not even trying to plug it, but we just did a story today on the increase in streaming that's going to happen this year, especially if fans aren't allowed at games. And I think it's going to last even if fans are allowed at games. And that's something that was going to happen eventually anyway. But out of necessity, a lot of schools in this area are running to it right now and trying to scramble to figure stuff out, how to broadcast football games and volleyball games and soccer and whatnot. And this refereeing, situation, I think could be kind of a rush in the reverse direction, where instead of getting better, it's going to get worse. So I'm really curious to see how this plays out. But from what I've heard, just from Lombardi talking at during some of the PIAA meetings, whether it's been media asking questions or just in the middle of the meetings, it's kind of been hey, we think we're going to be okay. We've been doing a lot of recruiting efforts, and we think the numbers are getting there. But we're going to do the best that we can. But it's not the PIAA's call really during the regular season. That's all local organizations that set all that up. So we could see something really different. And down here, I don't know exactly how it is up by you, but down here we have it's a really old refereeing population. I do not see at varsity games a whole lot of guys that are, in their 30s or so, and definitely not in their 20s. We've got some basketball officials down here that, man, they must be retired in their day-to-day job because they're still chugging along. And I think a lot of it's because there's no one else there.
Yeah, I'm fascinated because, like you said, I think what the pandemic done is it's expedited everything. So something that would have been a serious issue 5-10 years from now, like a ref shortage, all of a sudden it's here and it's knocking on the door. I am fascinated. If they greenlight the fall, it just feels like it's something that could just be so easily overlooked in all of this. Worried about safety, worried about scheduling. I just wonder how many referees will actually be willing to go out and perform that job for a lot of times, something that they're sometimes underpaid to do. I know some districts pay more than others, but a lot of times it's not like this is a high-paying job. It's not like there's a lot of glory in the job. It's not like you're treated well while you're doing the job. I'm just wondering how many will decide to back out at a time like this. And
you're going to see too, these scheduling issues where, we're already talking about condensed schedules in a lot of different districts and leagues where, again, Mid-Penn, we're not starting the regular season until September 24th, 25th, 26th for most sports. You're going to try and get a regular season in with the hopes of districts and states in about a 5-week span, 6-week span, give or take. Soccer, that means, if you're division 7 or 8 teams, you're going to have 12 to 14 games trying to do a round, double round robin there. That's tight. That's, it's still roughly about the same density of scheduling that you'd have during a regular season because you're just knocking out the non-conference games. But it's going to be tighter. And if you have any inclement weather, you suddenly have fewer weeks to try and reschedule. If one of those teams has to quarantine or multiple teams have to quarantine, that's going to condense their schedule even more if they can even make up those games. And then here's the thing that I just got to thinking about while you were talking about this is, if a team quarantines, could we see a ref or multiple refs say, not touching this game when they come back? I don't care what the sign says. This team is off limits. They got cooties and stuff. I don't know if that might happen, but that could.
Or even on top of it, the refs that previously refed the game of a team that now has to quarantine.
That too, yeah.
Those referees have to quarantine. It's a fascinating little side topic. If they greenlight this fall, I think refereeing is going to be a dirty little kind of off to the side issue that it's going to kind of smack people in the face.
It's going to be this weird Rube Goldberg dominoes thing all season. There is no linear path that this is going to work. It is going to be chaos from start to finish. I feel like if we get through this year, this fall season, just looking at fall with only a small fraction of teams shutting down or something like that, I'm going to be stunned because I don't see this, going smoothly.
So I'm going to put you on the spot. One word answer before we move on to talking about a possible spring. One word answer. Will we have sports in the fall?
Yes.
Okay. So your belief Friday is they'll come out and they'll give the green light and put it in the hands of the districts and of the administrations.
Yeah, PIAA is going to want to have a fall. Some schools are going to say not a chance, and then there's going to be a lot of schools that are going to do it. But in one word, we will have some sort of fall season.
So let's play devil's advocate then. And to me, this is the most fascinating conversation. Let's say that they follow the recommendation from the governor, and there are no high school athletics until after January 1st. I have heard so many examples. I've heard positives. I've heard negatives. I am fascinated at what a spring schedule looks like if there's nothing until January 1st. I'm fascinated by what that looks like the following year if they play football in the spring, because I think a lot of people are overlooking that. I don't think it's a simple transition just moving those sports back to the fall. This whole topic fascinates me. Just to kind of start it off, what do you think a spring athletic schedule would look like, assuming we have to fit the fall, winter, and spring into those 5-6 months?
I think, this is, without a whole lot of detail here, the basic structure we're seeing in a couple different states would probably be the model that PA would take to some degree. I mean, now every state has a different calendar of what plays in the fall. Most of the winter sports are basically the same. Everyone plays basketball in the winter and wrestling, and I think swimming is also there in most cases. But some springs have softball, and some states have softball in the fall. There's some differences there, but for the most part, they're moving to this. January, February is the winter season. March and April is your fall spring season, and then May and June is your spring season. There's a little bit of overlap from what I understand built in there with district and state playoffs in some cases. I know New York State, which granted they're just delaying the season, they're not pushing the spring, but they've flat out canceled state championships for this year, and they're just focusing on the regular season. But you'd have some overlap in terms of you'd have the winter basketball championships kind of running into football season or cross country season or whatnot, and you'd kind of have football championships kind of running into baseball season. But those people that are concerned about that, I mean, it's no different now. Football, especially in the fall, runs into the second week of basketball season. And depending on those schools, you could see kids that really aren't getting into, basketball shape or even playing games for, a week or two after that, because they might be just so banged up. We had one of our all-state wrestlers that, I think he went down to Army West Point on scholarship. He went through district playoffs for 1 or 2 rounds and sat for the first couple of weeks of wrestling. He was nursing some injuries and everything too, so he needed a little bit of a break, but he didn't start the season right away in wrestling. So we already see that it's going to be tighter in a 6-month span. But here's the reality of this: there is no best case scenario here. We're all trying to pick the least bad situation. If you're looking for sports, if you think sports should happen, it's basically just trying to find the path of least destruction. Is that going to a spring calendar? I tend to think yes, but some people, including PIAA, think it should be in the fall. There's no good way to do this because we're in the middle of a pandemic. A pandemic doesn't care. And one of the weird things about life is we've got, coaches like to preach dealing with adversity and whatnot. Man, there aren't too many better situations in life than we're going to get than this kind of adversity. And I don't mean to make light of that at all, but we all have to deal with this, and to think that we can just try and carry on without, messing with anything is a little bit, obtuse here. I've been talking to a coach for a couple of weeks who, is pretty vocal about this stuff. And one of the things he told me is that it seems like we're just so used to, football starts in August. And so I've got to be out there at training camp and getting ready to go. And first game is September or late August. And, this is just what we do. So, we've got to keep doing this. And it's keeping us from thinking about the ways that we can do this differently, because there is no choice. To think that we can do this the same as we've always done it is just not going to happen. Because even if we carry on with a normal fall season, like I said, I am convinced that you're going to have teams drop out because they're going to get, COVID. They're going to have quarantine issues. You're going to see maybe some districts don't have playoffs at all. Whatever. It's not going to be normal.
Yeah.
And when you get yourself
a couple of things that you hit on there, because I think you brought up some good points. The first one, I'm fascinated by people worrying about the end of a 2-month season. So if they went back to back like that, because to me the biggest issue is the start of it. The idea that you would have kids that play basketball, and then they're going to go strap on a helmet and try to squeeze in 6 weeks of football when the first game is going to have to be within the first week of that first month. And same thing going into the spring. To me, the fascination there is you're going to have young athletes with very little time to rev up and be prepared to do the things that they're expected to do. And I know they're not pro athletes. It's not this like grueling long season, but to ask some of these kids to put their bodies into the situation we're going to ask them to do with that back-to-back-to-back, I'm more worried about the start of those seasons than necessarily the end. I don't know how else to do it. Like you said, it's picking the best of a worst case, right? I'm being a problem stater and not a problem solver, but that would definitely worry me more. I agree with you.
And that's a fair point too, because like, we're used to football season in the summer. You do all the weight training to build up, and that mass is really important for football. And in basketball, there's still weight training with basketball and there's still weight training with wrestling. But like the weight training with wrestling kind of ties into football season pretty nicely. And in basketball, you don't need that same kind of muscle mass. It's more about the endurance and stuff. It's more about the legs. And there's no way in the middle of a 2-month winter season to really get that, bulk that you need to handle football. You'd see small, but granted, we're also going to see smaller teams to begin with. Everything I've heard is that, the weight training is one of the things that got hit the hardest from all of this because they haven't been able to have kids in the weight room. And, some kids do have home gyms or some access to working out and some kids didn't. The scheme stuff might be a little bit normal this year. It may be a little watered down, but it's going to be mostly the same because you can do install over Zoom and then during the off-season workouts. But we're going to see kids that would have been to 195, let's say at running back, they're only going to make 185, 190 this year just because they didn't have the working out. So it wouldn't have changed this year compared to doing this in the spring anyway. It's just, it's going to mess with how they build up their bodies.
It is. But I agree with you as far as I do think we've been stuck in this model of like football is in the fall, baseball is in the spring. I understand the indoor sports have to be in the winter, and that's just the world that we live in living in Pennsylvania. I am fascinated though. I have talked to different people. I even had a conversation with our athletic director here about how much sense it makes to play baseball at the end of the summer and into early fall, and then play football through the spring and into the summer. As far as scheduling, not having to cancel baseball games for the weather, football is much more conducive to playing in bad weather than baseball or softball is. And in a lot of places, softball plays in the fall, and they have significantly less cancellations than what baseball ends up having in the spring. I agree with you. If we were going to talk, we've been focused on a lot of the negatives, and who can blame us? But I do think that one of the positives that could come out of this is a restructuring and really looking at, I know from a standpoint of just being an athletic director, it would have to be significantly easier to organize 60 football players when you have them all in school for 5 months leading up to the football season than it is trying to get a hold of them and track them down for paperwork and physicals in the summer when they're not in school.
That's true.
So I do know that there are some positives. My fear with this is we're going to ask kids to play football in the spring, and we're going to turn around and ask them to do it again 3 months later. And I understand that the spring will be a condensed schedule. I understand that they're not going to play as many games and the wear and tear won't be as bad. I just don't know if kids should be asked to play 16, 18, 20 football games in a span of 5 months. And my fear is we're going to slam a spring season on them, and then we're going to turn around and say, well, football's in the fall. It's always been in the fall. Let's go at it again. That's one of my biggest concerns for student athletes, especially football players.
It'd be interesting. I think the smart route to go with that, and this would run into so many PR nightmare situations is, you could do one of the things I've read about, NBA and NHL, like they have to start this next season later. I think NBA is going to start at Christmas this time, and NHL is probably going to be around the same time. And it'll probably mean a shorter season this year. They won't have the 82 game schedule like normal. Maybe it's 64 or 72. I don't know. And it won't be until maybe the 21-22 season where they're back to what we consider normal. And if we were smart about this, I think high school could follow that same route if you went the spring schedule plan. And that, the one advantage is with the spring football season is you're going to have only 6 games for a regular season, give or take. And, if you get to playoffs, it has to be a shortened season. You're not going to have the 3 rounds of districts that we have, and then, 2 to 3 more rounds of states. So it won't be that long. So the wear and tear will be a little less than like our typical fall. But the smart thing to do would then be to condense the 21 football season a little bit to 8 games, maybe, where, start it in after Labor Day or something like that. And then, let it just give it an extra 2 or 3 weeks of breathing room to let everyone kind of settle down, get off their feet from baseball and whatnot, and start doing the weight training that they need to get caught up on to some degree. And then, then you start after Labor Day and go into a 8-game season with full districts and states. By 2021, we should be mostly out of this, regardless of, what kind of situation, when the vaccine and whatnot is, because by that point, pandemics generally take about 1.5 years to run through the system. But, you could have a mostly normal winter or fall season next year, just shave 2 games off the regular season. Now, maybe if I want to be glass half full, projection type of guy, maybe that's why PIAA is so hesitant to do a spring football season, because they don't know how they're going to handle 21. But then I'd also sit there and say, well, that's kind of short-sighted to not be able to think like that. This is the situation where, I understand what our status quo is so used to being. And I feel weird right now, like I should be getting ready for, scrimmages on Friday, or like, knee deep in our football preseason stuff. And, by the end of this week, I'm supposed to have like 10 teams done. But like, this is where you adjust and you learn to, again, fight through that adversity. And you got to make those changes there. I think that would be the smart idea. I just, again, with PIAA looking like they're not going to do it, I don't think it's something that is going to matter too much, but that's what you'd have to do. Is the smart thing to do would be shorten the spring season, shorten the fall, and, try and have a normal postseason in the fall next year.
Oh, I agree with that. The whole thing, like I said, I think it's fascinating because despite everything that's being talked about, I just wonder from the viewpoint of the student athlete, I try to put myself and say, what would really benefit them? I think playing in the fall benefits the student athletes from an individual standpoint. I think it's great for them. But realistically, as a whole, as a group, I don't know how safe we can honestly do that. If it moves to the spring, I've just been in the mindset of, okay, what are the challenges? And what's really like 8 months from now, what are some of the issues that we're going to have to be dealing with? And I really do think that idea of how do kids rev up for sports when they don't really get a preseason, and that idea of just scheduling, like, are we willing to be more flexible, whether it's shaving off games, whether it's completely readjusting and looking at how we do things as a state from a scheduling standpoint. I'm fascinated by it. Jake, I really appreciate you coming on. I want to shout you out. You did one of my favorite pieces of the year still was the data you did for the wrestling.
Cool.
Going in. Absolutely fantastic on Cumberlink. I didn't know if there was anything else that you wanted to plug.
I mean, our market doesn't really mess too much with yours, but I mean, what I'd say is follow a bunch of different reporters from around the area. You got Tom Reisenweber, you got myself, you got Mike Drago, Mike White. We're trying to cover this PIAA stuff. Each one of us is doing it a little differently than everyone else, and, kind of in our own little lanes. And, my perspective is different from everyone else's. I think I kind of stand in the minority here for journalists, and I really just don't trust having a fall season. But, follow us and keep an eye on things. I mean, Friday's kind of, D-Day here for us. It's, decision day, and it's going to be big, but I'm sure a lot of your readers and viewers are going to be, scoping out, Mitch and everyone else and trying to get every little morsel of detail that they can. So I just say, keep doing that. And I guess if there's one other plug, it's man, subscribe to your local papers, or help out media outlets however you can. We're doing the best that we can at these times. We're getting hit hard too in this economy, and have been for several years. So support those reporters that they're out there trying to cover your community as best as they possibly can, and give them a fighting chance to do their jobs as well as they do.
I'm excited for high school sports to come back, and I'm excited to get to see you cover them again. Again, Jake, thanks for coming on. Really appreciate it. We have to do this more often. This I don't know why it took us so long to do this. This was good.
Yeah, maybe we can share some stories from when we used to work together.
we could definitely share some stories. I appreciate it, Jake. I'll talk to you soon.
Take it easy, man.